Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars.
SoundCartel.
Sales is a really broad term for activities like cold calling and prospecting. But what is prospecting, really? And what does it involve? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. If you want to strike gold for your business, you've got to get prospecting. That's according to Ingrid Maynard, who brings more than 25 years' experience to the job of successful selling. Ingrid calls herself the sales doctor, and she says prospecting is a distinct and essential part of selling, even though many people in sales prefer to avoid it. So, what do we need to know about prospecting? And, Heather Dawson asks, does it take a particular skill to be good at it?
Yes, it does. I think, first of all, you need to understand that it's an essential part of selling, because I think that the people that struggle with prospecting are those people who think that they're bothering people or that it's an inconvenience to do what it is that they do. And with that mindset, you're never going to be successful at it. To be a good prospector, you really need to, first of all, understand what it is that you do and the value that you bring, number one. Number two is you need to understand how that relates directly to the decision maker that you're targeting. And you need to have a structure behind you, because if you're trying to do it on the fly without any kind of strategy or structure or understanding as to what the next steps are after that conversation, then it makes it too difficult, and any salesperson's likely to give up at the first couple of signs of rejection.
So what's the difference between prospecting and cold calling?
I would say that cold calling is a subset of prospecting, and prospecting is really the total amount of activities that you do, or the total number of activities that drives new business into a company, and cold calling is part of that. But without cold calling, you're not actually adding to the flow of new business opportunities that will eventually obviously become warm prospects. So another way to think about it is that you only ever make one cold call, and then every call after that really should be with somebody who's really happy to hear from you.
But is that why salespeople often avoid prospecting, Ingrid, because they equate it with cold calling, or they just don't want a cold call?
You're absolutely right, Heather. Yes, that's one reason. And I think that the other reason is because they often don't have a structured reason for calling somebody that they don't know in the first place. So if you're trying to just create a meeting with somebody, but there's no real reason behind just wanting to do business with that company, then it makes cold calling a very arduous task for even the best of salespeople. So cold calling really needs to be thought about in terms of the strategy and the overarching sales strategy. So, for example, whenever you do a cold call, you really have to go in with something that's going to add value to the conversation, and it's going to possibly help support the particular decision maker in their role and what you think the broader business objectives are, or the objectives of that particular department, so that there's a reason to call them and you feel good about that call because you know that it's actually something that they're probably going to be interested in.
Now, Ingrid, you say that if you do prospecting consistently, it'll transform the way you sell. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, look, it's like anything, Heather. You really need to develop a muscle, and to build a muscle, you need to do something repetitively, and over time you break old habits and then you build new muscle on top of that. And prospecting is exactly the same. What I mean by doing it consistently, it'll transform the way you sell, is that if you are consistent with your prospecting and you're filling your sales pipeline, you have more people to meet with, and the more people that you meet with, the more you get to talk about what it is that you do and to sell in a way that's coming from a place of abundance, because you've got a filled pipeline. So you're not selling from a place of, oh my God, I've got to make this target, or what if this particular person doesn't convert into a sale or a request for a proposal. You can actually be completely present for each person that you're meeting with, knowing that if this one doesn't work out, or if you're not going to be a fit for that particular client, or if that client's not going to be a fit for what it is that you do and the kind of the way that you work, it's fine because there's a number of other people that, you've already got in your diary ready to meet with. And the only way that that's going to happen is if you continually prospect and make sure that that's a consistent part of your sales strategy.
Well, you also say, Ingrid, that salespeople should prospect at least twice a day.
Yes.
So why is that important?
I mean, that's the minimum, but I always find that there are different times in the day where you're going to reach particular decision makers. So if you're trying to reach a C-level decision maker, you need to call them at a time when they're not going to be harassed by a number of other people pulling them every which way. So start of the day and right at the end of the day would be two key times to call that particular level of decision maker. But equally, what I mean by that is not just here's a time to call and here's another time to call. Moreover, it's about being flexible about the times that you do call so that you have a number of different time slots scheduled in, particularly when you're trying to call a range of different decision makers. And the reason for that is you'll find over time that there's a pattern, and you'll find that once you get to know organisations and the organisations that you're trying to break into, they'll have certain days when the marketing team will have a meeting, or when the HR team's out, or the training team are delivering training, for example. And once you get an understanding as to which days they are, then you can organise to either call on different days for those particular companies, or you can find a time in the day where you're more likely to reach those decision makers.
Well, talking of reaching the decision makers, it often means talking to other people in the hierarchy along the way. Yeah. And let's think of very defensive executive assistants, for example. Any tips on how to get through to the decision makers?
There's a few things I think to remember. Gosh, I had a business that specialised in prospecting, and had that business for over 10 years. And one of the things that we knew was really important was making sure that we made the receptionist happy to hear from us. Because if they're not happy to hear from you and they don't like you, they will not put you through, because that's their job, is to try and keep the traffic going through in terms of phone calls to different departments down as much as possible, apart from things that they think at their level are going to create value. So that's number one. Number two is that, again, at executive level in particular, you need to make an executive assistant your ally and part of your team. So unless you start to develop a relationship with that person, you're not going to get to the decision maker, because they manage their diaries and they will determine, and they also know the business strategy because they're doing most of the operational work. So if you maintain a relationship with the executive assistant and they understand the value of what you're doing to that particular decision maker that they're looking after, they will make sure that you get some time, and they'll also advocate for you to that decision maker. So that's, I guess, before you reach the decision maker. If you actually happen to get through to the decision maker, then you get one shot. So my suggestion would be absolutely know why this call is something that this person needs to take, and also what value message you're trying to communicate.
That was the sales doctor, Ingrid Maynard. Business Essentials Daily is a SoundCartel podcast. Executive producer is Heather Dawson. Producers are Nick Schilberger, Chris Ashmore, and myself. Technical production by Pete Letts and Belinda Trimboli. I'm Nicole Goodman. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more Be Daily next week. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.